A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all again to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. I hope you have utilized the weekend for a good revision of the previously covered topics. First of all, I extend wishes on Eid. So, Eid Mubarak to each and every one of you. So, on this context, we will take up the quote for the day by Khalil Gibran, which says, I love you when you bow in your mosque, kneel in your temple, and pray in your church. For you and I are sons of one religion, and it is the Spirit. So, it shows that he is talking about bowing in the mosque, kneeling in the temple, and praying in a church, because everybody is a son of one religion, which is the Spirit. So there is one universal unknown power, which is the Spirit, or which is in whatever forms you call, and we are all children of the same God. So this is what the value or the essence of religion should be, that it espouses values of equality and brotherhood among all. So this quote is very similar to the one I had already spoken before of Basavanna. He also said that my legs are like the pillars and my body is like the temple, and my head is like the golden cupola of the temple. So that is how it's not that you don't become a religious person when you go and visit a temple, but rather what values you have in your heart, that is what matters the most. So this quote is very apt when you talk about peace, tolerance, harmony, communalism, and communal riots are happening. We hear so much news about that. So in that context, regarding secularism, universal brotherhood, and equality. So what is the role of religion in inculcating the right kind of values in us? Today we have the menace of terrorism, radicalization, etc. So in this context, what religion should tell us about equality and brotherhood? So this is the relevance of this quote. So with this, we will move forward to the first topic of the day, which is regarding ARYA, which is attracting and retaining youth in agriculture. So first of all, this aims to attract the youth in agriculture and also retain them. For this purpose, it trains the youth in various skills which are associated with agriculture, so that they are gainfully employed in the agriculture sector. So this is a scheme for attracting and retaining youth in agriculture. It was started by the Indian Council for Agriculture Research, and at present it is in operation in 100 districts across the country. So now let us see what are the threefold objectives of ARYA. So ARYA's major first objective is to provide rural job opportunities or rural employment to youth who can gainfully and profitably get employed in the agricultural sector. So that is the rural employment generation. That is one important objective. The second is regarding the food and the nutritional security in the country, because definitely agriculture is the backbone for both the food and nutritional security. So only when the youth with that fresh mindset and skill set are employed in agriculture gainfully, only then we can ensure the food and nutritional security. So this is the second most important objective of ARYA. And the third is to curb distress migration. So we know that due to lack of employment opportunities in the rural areas, it serves as a pull factor why towards the cities people are getting attracted. So it is a push factor because the rural areas don't have attractive employment opportunities. So this is increasing the pressure on the urban areas. So in order to reduce pressure on the urban areas because of distress migration from the rural areas, this ARYA scheme becomes extremely important. So these are the three-fold objective of the ARYA scheme. So if you have seen carefully in the previous slide, it shows a man who is sitting on some kind of a machine and is scaling the trunk of a tree. So that is a local innovation by a man who has invented a machine through which even the areca nut trees can be scaled. So we know farmers try to scale the areca nut trees and many mishaps happen, and many farmers get disabled or even die for that matter because they have such fatal falls from extreme heights. So these kind of innovations will help to make farming activity more safe, profitable, and remunerative to the farmers. So it is this kind of skills which needs to be encouraged. The ICAR, for example, tells that in the agriculture, these engines are used. So when you are using that, definitely you will need some mechanics to repair whenever these engines goes out of service. So that is one area where you can skill the youth. So similarly, if you go on and on, you can find several such areas where the youth could be skilled to be employed gainfully in the agricultural sector. So this is precisely what the scheme aims to do. Now with this, we will go to the second topic, which is regarding the India-China relations. So first we will see the three major points where the escalations are happening in the recent times. So first we know is the Pangong Tso region. So that is the eastern Ladakh region where the skirmishes or the standoff between the troops are happening. Next is the Nakula, which is in Sikkim. This is the second place. And the third is the recent Galwan River Valley near Damcho, where the standoff is now happening. So these are the three major areas now where escalations are seen between the Indian and the Chinese troops. So let us see this recent spike in the escalation between the Indian and the Chinese troops also has some strategic reasons. In the previous video on Friday, we already saw the reasons for the recent spike in the standoff between the two troops of the two countries. So we have already in detail seen the reasons. We have two additional reasons which we can term as the strategic reasons. One is regarding what you can see in the map. You can see, draw this map even in your examination. So India has now constructed a road from joining Darbuk Shok to Daulat Beg Oldi. So this particular development of road or logistics in the border sector has enabled us in better troop positioning even in those areas where hitherto we did not have troops because of the lack of the road infrastructure in the region. So because we have been able to develop more roads and logistics in the border regions, we have been able to deploy troops more closely to the LAC. So that is one reason, strategic reason, that China now wants to hinder our activities in this region so that its presence in this region is undisputed. The second important strategic reason is the Indo-US ties. Now on the one hand, India and US ties are getting strengthened, and on the other there is trade war between US and China. So their relations are getting worse day by day. So what China also wants to reaffirm India that even though India has close relations with the United States, it is not going to help India in when that particular region is concerned. So China is definitely having a dominant presence when it comes to the 3,480 odd kilometers border that the two countries share. And as far as this is concerned, India's close relationship with the United States is not going to help India in any way. So this point, China wants us to take back. So this is another strategic reason for the recent spike. Next thing we'll be looking at is how there have been spikes, there have been troops standoff and face off even before the current face off. So how they were different. So when you tell the different, you can use this representation as I have shown. So in this column, you can write the parameter on what parameter they are differing. So this is before and this is the after scenario. So this how the current escalations differ from the previous escalations has been told by ambassador to China between 2014 and 16, whose name is Ashok Kanta. So Ashok Kanta, who was the ambassador to China between 14 and 16, has told that the recent spike is different from the previous ones in three important ways. First is the number of soldiers. So before, the number of soldiers that the Chinese deployed near the LAC was like in few dozens, that's it. And now the Chinese soldiers numbering in hundreds are now present across the LAC. So this is the number of soldiers who are deployed near the LAC has increased multiple times. The second is the aggression levels of the China from Chinese side. So now if you look at the aggression levels from the Chinese side, they have already injured more than 70 Indian soldiers, and some even had to be flown out for treatment. And the Chinese boats were even earlier doing patrols near the Pangong Tso Lake, but now the number of boats have also increased by more than 3 times. in the area. So it shows how the aggression levels have also increased compared to the previous ones. So the previous levels were moderate, and now you can write this: more than 70 Indian soldiers have been injured, and also the boat patrolling in the Pangong Tso Lake has increased by more than 3 times, while earlier these aggression levels were moderate. Third important difference is the contested areas. So when it comes to LAC, the line of actual control, there is no proper clear demarcation of where the LAC is. But however, there are some areas which were not even contested in the first place before. But those areas which seemed to be clear yesterday have now been under contestation. For instance, the Galvan River Valley. So this was not even contested by China before that. Galvan River and the areas nearby belongs to China. But now it has started to tell that Galvan River Valley is again part of the Chinese occupied area. Why? Because it is near this whole region that our newly constructed road goes through. So that is why China is now contesting that even those areas belong to China, which it did not demand all these years. So this is the third difference that has been seen in the recent standoff compared to the earlier ones. So next we will see the tribal welfare one topic. So as you can see in the heading, the Katkari tribal youth bring the benefits of Giloy to the doorsteps. So the Katkari tribal community is there in Shahpur. So what they have done is that they have been able to market Giloy. So Giloy is widely used by the pharmaceutical companies in the manufacture of antiviral and anti-malarial drugs. So these tribal youths have come under the leadership of one tribal youth of the Katkari community, which is Sunil Pawar. So under Sunil Pawar's leadership, many youth have come together and they have formed a group of 10 to 12 members, and they have started to market Giloy. So they are now selling this in the local markets, and they have also set up a group called as the Adivasi Ekatmik Samajik Sanstha. So Adivasi Ekatmik Samajik Sanstha has been set up by these group of 10-12 tribals, and they are now trying to market Giloy, and they have been fairly successful in it also. And while they started marketing, they came to know about the government initiative of Pradhan Mantri Van Dhan Yojana. So in which some financial assistance will be given so as to add value to the minor forest produce, so that the tribals are able to market their minor forest produce in a better manner. So when the group heard of this initiative also, they could immediately apply, and they also got the benefit from this. So they are making use of this money also to add value to Giloy and then sell it. So apart from this, the group is now also has developed an online presence also. It has its own website through which it is making all the sales. Apart from this, it is also planning to train some self-help groups in both forward and backward linkages. So forward backward linkages in a way that how Giloy is to be grown, and how to maintain the levels, how to harvest so that the levels availability lasts longer. And the second, in the forward linkages, the self-help groups are being trained on how to add value to Giloy so as to improve its marketability. So this is the initiative of the tribal youth who have come together and have been able to achieve so much. So this shows how much important the empowerment of the tribal youth is, so as to develop them in their own ways. So even if it is a minor forest produce, how hand-holding them and supporting them by making them available the wider market can help. And also this group has developed its own website. So giving that technical empowerment to them is again utmost important to be able to reach wider sections of customers. So this shows a very interesting case study of empowerment of tribal youth. So next we will go to the topic, which is the role of NGT. Now what you are seeing in the picture on the slide, this picture is taken from Economic Times, and the caption to this picture was that this is not Switzerland, but it is the Bellandur Lake of Bangalore. So it is not the snow, it is actually the froth that is overflowing the lake. So the Bellandur lake was in news for all the bad reasons, that it was extremely polluted, and the lake had started to froth so much that what you can see in the picture is actually a reality. So in this context, NGT had taken suo cognizance of this case regarding the high levels of pollution in the Belandur and Vartur lake in Bangalore, Karnataka. So after NGT's ruling, NGT had set up a committee which would oversee the implementation of the guidelines given by NGT. So now this committee has seen that first of all there is high heavy metal pollution in the lake still. So this nothing has happened to it. The levels of high metal pollution is very high. Secondly, the NGT had told that the silt from the lake bed has to be taken and that has to be deposited in a quarry. But even the quarry where this silt is going to be deposited, that quarry is also now not yet finalized. Where that quarry would be, that also is not finalized. So that is the second issue. And third issue is the Karnataka State Pollution Control Board had noted that nearly 61 industrial units in and around the Belandur and Vartur lakes, they didn't even have a sewage treatment plants and they were emptying their industrial waste directly into Belandur. So which was also a contributing factor in frothing of the lake. So NGT had told that these industries in and around should have their own treatment plants and only the treated waste should be emptied into the lake. But even after that, these industrial units don't have a sewage treatment plant as of yet, and also these industrial units had already emptied untreated sewage into the lake, so for which a fine or a penalty of over 270 crores was imposed on them. But this penalty amount is also not yet collected. So this shows first of a number of things. Firstly, the level of pollution in the lakes and rivers of India. It is a classic example of that. Second, the blatant violation of various legislations which are directed at environmental protection. So in this case, for instance, the water prevention and control of pollution and the role of bodies like the Karnataka State Pollution Control Board, which is a regulatory body. It shows its failure. And even the National Green Tribunal, which is a statutory body that had been set up regarding the environmental jurisprudence in India, even it had taken suo motu cognizance of the frothing of the lake, but still this whole episode shows the ineffectiveness of the NGT in even getting its own verdict or directions implemented. So there is poor follow-up and there is a lack of implementation of the NGT guidelines at the field level, at the ground level. So NGT being a statutory body, you can directly have a question like critically analyze the functioning of National Green Tribunal in safeguarding the environment. So in which case you can use it as an example to show how ineffective NGT is in getting its own directions implemented. So now we will move to the next topic, which is Manrega. So on Manrega also, even NGT also we have covered before. So wherever earlier topics have already been covered, we will put that as part of the pinned comment. So you can go through those respective videos to have the previous coverage also. So even on Manrega on Friday, we already saw that the allocation to Manrega has been 1 lakh crore. But however, nearly 16,000 odd crore is the payment dues for the previous year. So therefore, the net allocation that is available for the current year would just be 84,000 crores. So this issue we had already discussed in the previous video. So this article on Manrega was written by none other than Gene Rees himself. So he discusses two very important issues when it comes to Manrega. First, the Manrega scheme is supposed to be a demand-driven scheme. So any eligible worker, if he comes and demands work, then he has to be given. If he is not given work within a period of 15 days, he will have to be given unemployment allowance. But however, on the ground, the scheme is no longer demand-driven. So what happened in the earlier case and what is happening now? So earlier, whenever a worker approached the work site and then there he got himself registered, so the worker could just approach the work site directly, get himself registered and start working. But now it is not the case. The worker must have his or her name registered in the e-muster rolls before he could approach the work site and then before he can be given work. So this appearance of the name of the worker in the e-muster roll is a must now. So this again is creating a lot of hindrance, because for this to happen, the workers will have to file an application form. A job application form has to be filled by these workers. But many workers who are actually willing to work are not even aware that there is something called as a job application form which they have to fill. And even in those cases where they are aware, they find it very difficult to fill those forms. This is Jane Rees's experience from Latehar in Jharkhand. So this was a field experience of Jane Rees. So where he says that this scheme is not demand driven at all, because the worker's name has to be present in the e-muster rolls for them to be able to demand work, and for this they have to file job application form, and they have no clue what is job application form or how to file it. So if you see those workers who have actually gotten the work, if you see them, their job application forms were not filled by themselves, but they were filled by other stakeholders who have interest in the Manrega work. For instance, for many of these workers who are already now working under Manrega, the job application form has been filled up by the landowners who want some work to be carried out on their land, or the job application form is filled by some government authorities because they have to meet certain deadlines or targets under Manrega. So it is these people who are actually filling the job application form of the workers, but not the workers themselves. So for this, Jane Rees recommends that there has to be more construction works, more categories of construction works will have to be permitted under Manrega, A, and B, the Gram Rozgar Sevaks who can help out the workers in filling of the application forms and all that. So their number has to be increased. So these are all some of the recommendations of Jane Rees to overcome this issue. The second issue he talks about is a payment issue. So first of all, we already saw the statistics last class, how 16,000 odd crores is the pending dues in the Manrega wages which have to be paid to the laborers for their previous year work. So already there are payment dues, and secondly, now the payment is being made directly to the bank accounts. Given the density of the bank branches in the rural areas, and also given the current lockdown, it is extremely difficult for these workers to go to the bank and collect it, or even through the bank correspondence, it is extremely difficult. So also it is observed that when it comes to the online payment of wages, there is also a 4% rejection rate which is seen. And thirdly, the know your customer norms and complying with that is a very cumbersome process for the rural poor. So therefore, Jane Rees recommends that for at least this during the COVID crisis, we may shift to the cash payment basis, where the workers are given cash directly on the work site, so that they are saved from all these hassles. So this is what Jane Rees talks about Manrega. Now we will go to the next topic, which is regarding the APMC reforms. Now, as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, we saw on Friday some important reforms have been announced as far as APMCs are concerned. So earlier, the APMCs had a monopoly in the sense that the farmers could sell their produce only in the APMCs in which they were registered. So they were not allowed to sell their produce outside. But after this measure under Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, the farmers are free to sell their produce anywhere, anytime. So they don't have to sell only in the APMCs in which they have been registered. So in the last video itself, we saw that how this is very helpful for the farmers, how it is helpful for the buyers. So it is a win-win for both the farmers and the buyers. This discussion we already had in the last class. But this article, it's actually offering some arguments why this reform is bad in a way. So now let us see what will be the counter for these reforms. That is how dismantling the APMC monopoly can actually be bad and prove to be counterproductive. The first thing is agriculture is a state subject. So this APMC law, however, has been enacted by the center. The second is that the states have recognized that the APMC model has several flaws, and they have themselves undertaken several steps to modify the APMC, the whole setup, to bring about reforms in the APMC. For example, some of the states have already brought about a unified trading license where the farmer can trade across the state, and some states have also introduced a single point levy of the market fee so that the market fee is not levied at multiple times. Tamil Nadu, for instance, has even done away with the market fee. So several reforms have already been taken by the state governments, and some states have also taken the reform that the farmers are now able to directly sell their agricultural produce to the customers without having to go to any of the APMCs. For example, the Raitu Bazaar of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, the Raita Sante scheme of Karnataka, and Apni Mandi of Punjab. All these are examples which show that states have already taken reforms facilitating the direct selling of agriculture produce by the farmers to the customers. So the states have already taken reforms, and it was not needed on part of the center to bring about this recent reform under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, given that agriculture is a state subject and the states have already taken these measures. The second argument is that whatever measure now has been announced as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan could also prove to be a flawed policy measure. This was seen with the help of the Bihar case study. So what happened in Bihar? The APMC monopoly was dismantled. So farmers were given the freedom to sell, and when APMC monopoly was not there, it means that the private sector could step in and they could invest in development of infrastructure and the mandis. They could have their own markets. But what happened in Bihar? The government dismantled the APMC monopoly, but it also expected that the private sector would come in and it would enhance the competition by investing in the market infrastructure and by opening several private mandis. But this did not happen. The private sector did not come and invest to improve the marketing infrastructure. So by this, what happened? The state had already deregulated the APMCs. So these APMCs before used to pay a regular tax to the government. But now that the state had already deregulated the APMCs, the state did not get any revenue as tax from the APMCs. So the government didn't get any revenue from APMCs. So government didn't have the money to even maintain the existing marketing infrastructure. Even that was getting deteriorated. At the same time, the private was not stepping in and it was not investing in development of the market infrastructure. So all of these led to development of several private mandis which were completely unregulated. So when there was unregulated, there was no stability in the prices, the farmers' interests were not protected. So all these things started happening, which again proved to be against the interest of the farmers only. So this shows how these kind of deregulation of the APMCs can prove to be a flawed policy measure. So these are the counter arguments or the demerits of the recent proposal under Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So when you are asked a question like deregulation of the APMCs, analyze it critically. So you have to tell about the positives and the negatives. Positives we have already discussed last class, that how it is a win-win for everybody. And we have already discussed the negative, the Bihar case study, and also agriculture being a state subject, and states have already taken several reforms. So this is the critical analysis of the entire reform measure that has now been introduced as part of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So we'll move to the next one, which is a few things about the e-technology that was there in the Indian Express and Hindu. The first thing is that the real estate agents are now virtually showing the buildings and homes to the prospective buyers. So buyers from their homes are able to take a virtual tour of the buildings and they're able to make their buying and investment decisions. So even with a small deposit, the construction activity is going on, that these are prospective buyers who are going to buy the homes tomorrow. So this shows how the business models are adapting to the technological growth that is happening and also to the constraints imposed by the lockdown. So we must have flexible business models, and the way businesses are conducted are changing and they are trying to use the latest technology. So these real estate agents are giving virtual tours to prospective home buyers. So this shows how the latest technology can be utilized in conducting businesses. This is the first example. However, when we are using the e-technology, definitely our personal details will also be more vulnerable to theft and leakage. So this is what has happened, that data of some 18 million Indians and data of nearly 2000 Aadhaar cards have been leaked on the dark web. So this was revealed by Cybel Inc., which is a United States-based cyber intelligence firm. So this was revealed by Cybel Inc. that nearly 18 million Indians' data and 2000 Aadhaar card details have been leaked on the dark web. So this shows how vulnerable our data is and how much our privacy is diluted or compromised when we have put our own personal data on the cloud or on the internet. So this talks about, this is an important example to show the importance of cybersecurity and making the cybersecurity architecture more robust. So one more example related to e-technology is the Indian Institute for Horticultural Research has now set up an online portal for the sale of quality seeds. So anybody from anywhere can just go to this portal and order any quantity of horticultural seeds, and from this online portal it will be delivered to the respective person. So it has two advantages. One is that quality seeds will be given, so whatever output that gets developed from these seeds will be qualitative ones. The second thing is these seeds are also high yielding variety seeds, so the yields also will improve. So this will improve the overall horticulture sector and the produce and its contribution to the GDP. The third important thing is that these high yielding varieties developed by the IIHR are also disease resistant. So they are disease resistant, which means that the amount of pesticides which will be used to grow these seeds will also be less. And less amount of pesticides means enhanced environmental protection, because pesticides are usually washed away by the runoff or rains and they lead to eutrophication, and even pesticide residue will be there on the farm produce, so which is again harmful for in the entire food chain. It is harmful. So less use of pesticides means environmental protection, so therefore this will also enhance the environmental protection because of less use of pesticides. Why? Because the IIHR seeds already have the disease resistant qualities. So this again is a good example how a government institute has launched an online portal and is enabling the delivery of quality seeds through the online portal. So related to again technology is another recent measure that has been taken by the Chinese central bank. So the Chinese central bank has announced the central bank digital currency. So in this context, we will see some details about the central bank digital currency. So where the central bank of a country is itself issuing digital currency, that is the central bank digital currency. But however, not several central banks across the globe have issued their own digital currencies. They are being very skeptical in this regard, but they have their own reasons to be skeptical about cryptocurrencies. So in this regard, the first thing is that this will challenge the monopoly of the central banks. So when they start issuing the digital currencies, this will challenge the monopoly of the central bank itself. The second thing is that when you talk about cryptocurrency, which is entirely through the medium of internet and softwares, so any software bug is going to compromise the entire thing. So software bugs, cybersecurity issues will always remain. The third thing is the dark web. So through these cryptocurrencies, it is observed that through the dark web, which does not even leave any trail, or it makes tracing of the individuals extremely difficult. Through the dark web, the cryptocurrencies are being used to fund various criminal activities or the organized crimes like drug trafficking or terror financing and all that. So because of all these reasons, the central banks across the globe have been very skeptical to introduce the central bank digital currencies. However, it has several benefits. The first thing is the handling charges. So imagine handling the normal money or the notes. So it has its handling charges, and that eats up anywhere between 1 to 2% of the GDP goes off in handling those notes. So if you talk about digital currencies, none of this handling charges will be there. So it can save you 1 to 2% of the GDP, which goes into the handling charges of the traditional notes. The second thing is a tax evasion. So when we are talking about digital currencies, it happens over the internet. So whatever will happen, or whoever transacts will always leave an audit trail. A digital trail will always be there through which things can be traced back. So this will also reduce tax evasion. It will increase the compliance by the people, and therefore this will also lead to increase in the government's tax revenue. So this will therefore these digital currencies will also help in increasing the tax revenue. Similarly, because it is traceable and the audit trail is available, because whatever we do on the internet is a medium, the digital trail is always available. So this will therefore reduce financing of terrorism, money laundering, all these will also be, crimes will also be under control and it won't happen. Next important benefit is a financial inclusion. How financial inclusion, particularly in emergency situations like the present COVID case. So direct benefit transfers can be instantly delivered by the state authorities directly into the rural areas, right into the mobile wallets of the citizens who need them. So this is the financial inclusion in which it will help. Also, when it is leaving the patterns, the audit trails it is leaving, it is then very easy to analyze a purchasing pattern at the citizen level. So this can be used in making evidence-based policies. So at the citizen level, it is possible to analyze the purchasing patterns, which is again very important to make policy decisions. Also, these digital payments will definitely make the cross-border payments frictionless and also more easy and direct and quicker. So the cross-border payments will also now improve. However, there are concerns that this will lead to surveillance, more surveillance into what activities we are doing, what we are purchasing, what we are not, what are our choices for investment, savings, everything. That there can be surveillance, and this is again in turn will lead to dilution of our privacy. So these are the concerns which are associated with the central bank digital currency. Now let us see another small topic, which is regarding persuasion and influence. So if you go through the GS4 syllabus, you have specific topics like the persuasion and influence. So what has happened in this case is, some of the good shooters in the country, they have come together to form a 100-second video. And this video is titled Don't Rush Challenge. So it is titled #Don't Rush Challenge is the title of this video. It is a 100-second video made by some of the shooters in the country. So they say that aim at the bad memories and shoot them, because nothing should stay for long. So this is what their message is. So they have spoken it specifically with respect to the coronavirus, that yes, it has led us to a lot of bad memories, but then we will move past beyond this, and this too shall pass, and tomorrow we will again progress and we will have to forget this bad memories. So this is very important when you come across various things where we need to forget the past. So imagine how the important role persuasion and influence through these kinds of initiatives will have on a person who is trying to overcome his addiction to drugs or alcohols, but he had a painful past because of the drugs and alcohol, where he must have lost his family, he must have lost his loved ones, and all that. He must have lost his job, he must have lost his respect in the society because of bad addiction to drugs and alcohol. So these kind of persuasion and influence is going to help the person to forget whatever bad things has happened in life before and focus on the present. So it is said that neither be a prisoner of the past, don't be a prisoner of the past, rather be the architect of the future. So this is what this whole thing aims to do, is to as a measure to persuade and influence somebody. So these audio visual means and the measure now taken by these shooters that aim at the bad things in life and they just shoot them away. So this is a very important message to carry. Now we will discuss yesterday's or Friday's question, where I had asked to critically analyze the functioning of Finance Commission in India. So first of all, when we talk of Finance Commission, you have to in the introduction part write the basic that it is under 280 article of the Constitution. It is called as the balancing wheel of fiscal federalism in India, and it has some aims which you can write as a hub and spoke representation, like it helps vertical division of taxes, that is the divisible pool of taxes between the center and the states. Next, in the horizontal division, that is how these divided pool is to be allocated between the states. Then in deciding the grants in aid that has to be given to the states. And fourth, in how the consolidated fund of India has to be boosted. In all these cases, it will give recommendations and advices. So it will be set up once in 5 years for a period of 5 years. It has the term, and then it will give a report to the president. So this basics you will write as part of the introduction. Next, you come to the issues. So when you come to the issues, so in the case of issues, you have to remember that when it is a 10-marker question, you don't have to explain each and every point that you write in detail. What some people do is they just write 2-3 points and then explain each of these in about 3 to 4 lines. So that is not needed in a 10-marker question. A little bit of analysis may be required in a 15-marker question, but in a 10-marker question, just you have to focus on writing the maximum number of points that you know. So even in 15 marker, but more so in a 10 marker, the width of the answer matters rather than the depth of the answer. So even if you write 1 or 2 lines per point, that is okay, but you have to write more points. So when it comes to issues, the first thing is that this finance commission is set up for a period of 5-year term. So financial planning, like the other, like for instance, Niti Aayog is engaged in planning for the country. So it requires a continuous effort. So just a 5-year term for a finance commission will lead to discontinuity in the financial planning. So the continuity aspect is one issue. The second thing is the membership. So if you look, if you have an analysis of the past finance commissions, you will see that many times just part-time members have been made part of the commission, and there are hardly any women members incorporated in the membership of the commission. So that definitely shows regarding the how the membership again needs to be very strong when you're talking about the finances of the country. So this again is also an issue. You need full-time dedicated members to be part of the commission and not part-time members. The third is the wider terms of reference. When you look at the terms of reference from one finance commission to the next, it is only getting wider and wider. For example, the 15th Finance Commission, it spoke about security, defense, and environment and all that. And it was in one of its terms of reference, it was also given that it has to recommend on curbing the populist tendencies in the states. But however, the term populist is itself subjective, and states may undertake some schemes for genuine public welfare, which may also be termed populist, because there is no such clear, unambiguous definition of what populist is. So wider terms of reference, which is again hurting the states, and they are protesting that finance commissions year after year are getting wider terms of reference, and in the formation of which the states are also not consulted. Next is the formula. So the Finance Commission comes out with a formula for division of the tax pool between the center and the states and among the states. So however, the criteria that is followed and on what basis this particular formula was arrived at, regarding to this, there is no transparency. So this again is a matter of concern. Fifth issue is that connection with the field. This we spoke even on Friday, that the field visits to ascertain the fiscal position at the states at the field level, that is also not very effective. Sixth, the Finance Commission depends on the states itself for the data. So states will always have their own interests when it comes to projecting some data. So the data that is provided by the states to the Finance Commission need not be always very objective and rational. So this one thing is that the Finance Commission should have collected the data on its own, but rather it is dependent on the data given by the states, and the states can just tweak the data as per their own convenience. The seventh issue is that the follow-up is poor. So even after the Finance Commission recommendations, it is seen that states don't follow this. The fiscal discipline as recommended by the Finance Commissions are not followed. For instance, the revenue expenditure goes up, the capital expenditure comes down. So expenditure that was earmarked to be as capital expenditure gets diverted to revenue. So all of these things happen, and the follow-up on this will be poor. So next is till the removal recently, there was a distinction between the plan and non-plan expenditure. So this has created some kind of weird things, like there were hospitals without doctors, there were schools without teachers, because salary of the doctors and teachers was considered to be non-plan expenditure, while plan expenditure was the construction of schools and hospitals. So this dilemma was there, and this led to some ambiguous results also. And then another issue is, earlier you can talk about the role of PC, though it is not there now, but earlier it definitely was. And another issue is that the states are not being taken on board. So states have several issues. For instance, in the case of the 15th Finance Commission, it was to consider the 2011 population figures. So several of the southern states had huge reservations about this, were objecting this, because that would be like penalizing those states who have actually taken good measures for population control. So the states are not happy with all that. And similarly, the finance commission at the central level has poor coordination with the state finance commissions. So this again we have to ensure. Apart from writing several issues, I've already listed 11 issues. So you can write 10 issues also. Just write it in 1-2 lines. That is enough. But you have to give a wider coverage. But at the same time, it says critically analyze, in which case you have to write the positives as well. That the 14th Finance Commission, for instance, provided for an increased devolution of 42%. Then performance-based grants are being given, like for instance, how far the agriculture reforms are being implemented, what is the level of development achieved in the aspirational blocks, how much encouragement the state has given to the trade, education, tourism, and even for the local self-governance bodies, to the urban local bodies and Panchayati Raj institutions also, performance-based grants are being given. And day before yesterday, when on Friday, when we saw that even AIMS director was a part of a high-level committee constituted under the Finance Commission to recommend measures related to handling of the COVID and the allocation needed for that. So even in that case, you can say that the Finance Commission has been able to rope in several experts and take their opinion while formulating anything or giving any recommendation. So you can write all these positives, and as an ending note, you can say that you can conclude with the challenges that are there. For instance, now this high debt to GSDP ratio is now increasing. States are providing farm loan waivers. The power sector is in crisis, COVID crisis. At the same time, the state's welfare spending has increased, like health, agriculture. Now there is also a shortfall in the GST collection, and this center GST dues which the center had to give to the states. So there is definitely some amount of fiscal slippage which the finance commissions will have to see in the upcoming year's country's finances. So it will be a challenge for the commission to ensure playing the role of the balancing wheel of fiscal federalism. So something related to way forward, where it is heading and all that. With that note, you can conclude the answer. So today's question is, analyze the pros and cons of cryptocurrencies. It is a simple, direct, straightforward question for 10 marks and 150 words. So that's it for today. Thank you.